sort of an easy way to work your way into it. Do the holidays, then do your own airspace. Holiday that's coming up in a couple days is Rosh HaShanah. What is Rosh HaShanah? New Year.
Cheat day?
How do you know it's New Year? Well, the word means Rosh Hashanah is the beginning or end of the year. Where do you see that that's the beginning of the calendar? Where in the Bible do you see that that's the beginning of the calendar? No place.
It's the 7th month anyway.
It's the 7th month in the holiday cycle, which begins with the month of Nisan. This month, referring to Nisan, first commandment, shall be in your calendar the first of months, or shall be at the first of your months. The Jew really isn't such a naturalist, no matter how natural he is. The Jew is a supernaturalist. And therefore, Rabbi Aviner said, when universal man properly and finely looks at the sunset and gets turned on by sunset, the Jew closes his eyes and tries to reach beyond that to God directly as he prays at sunrise or sunset. So the Jew basically is to be supernatural, not to ignore the natural, but to transcend it and try to get beyond it. So we don't really have any mention of this being a new year. What else would you call Rosh Hashanah? How else would you describe it? For example, Passover is the time of our freedom. Sukkot commemorates the desert stay. Each holiday has a certain theme. How else would you describe Rosh Hashanah besides its calendar significance? It sells a lot of calendars.
Would it be the creation of the world?
Day of the creation of the world. Where's that found in the Bible? No place really. Doesn't say Rosh Hashanah. Doesn't say anything. It's a controversy in the Talmud whether the world was created in Nisan or in Tishri. How else would you describe Rosh Hashanah? Happy birthday world is a reasonable description. Let's all pray and hope that both Jews and Arabs come back to the Torah this year and live in peace. But how else would you describe Rosh Hashanah?
Blowing the shofar?
Good, blowing the shofar. Is that found in the Bible?
Yes.
Yes. So now we have one description which fits the Bible. Any other descriptions of the day?
Well, what's just before the harvest?
Yes. Well, what is
harvest.
to the average Jew? What does Rosh Hashanah conjure up? What theme?
It's a new start. It's like rebirth.
Yes, we said that. New Year, maybe. That's a controversy. Well, what is the main thing on the Jew's mind at Rosh Hashanah?
Holidays?
Yeah, not so much. What?
Tshuva.
Huh?
Tshuva.
Yeah, and why is Tshuva so much on his mind?
Because of Yom Kippur.
Because it's the day of judgment.
Day of Judgment. Actually, the Yom Adin is Rosh Hashanah, perhaps. Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. So it's the Day of Judgment, when God judges the whole world, leave alone ourselves. So where is that mentioned in the Bible? Is it called Yom HaZikaron in the Bible? What do you say, Stanley? Is Rosh Hashanah called Yom HaZikaron?
Yom Teruah.
Yom Teruah, that's what's said. It's not called Yom HaZikaron even. Where's it called Yom HaZikaron? No place. There is some place. But I don't know if anyone's aware of it. Alright. What do we say just before? We do have this the day of blowing, and apparently referring to a shofar. That we have. Where later in the Bible is it so alluded then to again as a day of blowing the shofar? Where else in the Bible? After the one you mentioned, there's two of them. There's Leviticus 23. I might as well read them at this point. I have them. Leviticus 23:23.
In the camps, somewhere in the camps when they...
23 would be sort of like chug. You really have to work, yeah, as a mnemonic device. Now, 23:23. And God spoke to Moses to tell over, command the children of Israel, or speak to them, in the 7th month, the first day of the month, there shall be to you a day of cessation from work, a memorial of blowing, a holy calling, or a call. I would prefer maybe to translate it, a calling to holiness. I think that's our first translation. Mikra Kodesh. Perhaps a calling to holiness. Isn't that nice? Now, You might want to translate it, it shall be Yom Zikaron, a day of remembrance, and blowing, but that's not what it says. The word Zichron is a remembrance of. It's constructive, it's possessive. So it's a day of remembrance of blowing. That is a very peculiar expression. A day of blowing you can understand. And that's what it is indeed called in the book of Numbers. I think it's Numbers 21, something like that. 1 second. 29, 1 to 6. The other reference to Rosh Hashanah. By the way, there's lots of places in the Bible where the holidays are described. How come we don't find Rosh Hashanah in all of them? It's only in these few. Any suggestions?
Because it's not a harvest festival.
Right, so therefore. So it won't appear with the harvests. And where else won't it appear? It's not only not a harvest festival, it's something else it's not.
It's not a season.
Well, it did come to a certain season. It may not mark it again. That's sort of like it's not a harvest festival.
Okay.
It's beginning of winter.
It's something else it's not.
It's not a full moon festival.
True, but that's not, I don't think that's a category of classification.
It's not.
So it should be missing where you're speaking of harvest aspects. And what else should be missing from? Where you're speaking of pilgrimage aspects. Because the holidays, in other words, they're listed in various places for historical commemorations, for the aspect of agriculture, which you will find similar holidays in various ancient cultures, agricultural festivals, and for the purposes of pilgrimage festivals. So Rosh Hashanah doesn't fall into either of those categories, agricultural point or pilgrimage festival. 3 times a year, all your mail shall go up to the house of the Lord. There goes Norman Rockwell's family sukkahs cover. You know, wife doesn't feel so well, she can't go. Well, husband's got to go. But that's a side point. Anyway, 3 times a year your mail shall go up to Jerusalem, Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuos. No mention of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Therefore, where that's described, then you don't find those festivals. So what we're left with here is Leviticus and Numbers. Numbers 29, 1 to 6. In the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall have a calling to holiness. You shall do no matter of work, servile work. I would say better translation would be no matter of human intelligent work. It is a day of blowing to you. Yom Truah Yelachem, a day of blowing. Here it's not memorial of blowing, but blowing. So that is the only theme in the Torah.
There are 3 kinds of light.
It's also true. But what does Zichron Truah? So the rabbis say the Torah is hinting here at the real state of eventual affairs. That the rabbis will in the future make a ruling that despite the law of the Torah that you should blow shofar on Shabbat, you should blow shofar all the time, it's a day of blowing. On Shabbat, you shall not blow the shofar, even though God said you should blow it all the time, because you will come to violate a law of God, not to transport things on the Shabbat. And after the person is having the day of his life, he's going to blow shofar for 3,000 people in the great synagogue, and he forgot to bring it there before Shabbat. There's going to be a mighty great temptation to stick it in the back pocket or in his suit jacket or under his tallis and bring it to shul, violating the law of the Torah. So the rabbis say God would rather you don't do something positive and good. And maybe that the whole people shouldn't do it, rather than that some individuals should violate a law. And the same thing by lulav on Shabbat. We don't take it. Everybody will agree. All right? They do take it in the Beit HaMikdash. They can be careful there. But since shofar is universal, it's out. Very interesting thing, which itself would merit quite a
Are you
discussion.
saying that it's only because of carrying it?
I believe that's it. Yes.
And what about the fact, like today you have an Eruv?
Well, so, they all make differentiation. Some places do, some don't. It's interesting. Here we do. In Boston they don't. So anyway, the rabbis prohibited shofar on Shabbat. So therefore the Torah may be giving a hint of that, even the Torah itself, that there's a time when instead of blowing, it's a day of remembering blowing. You talk about it, you read about it, you meditate on its messages, but you don't do it. Okay?
Yeah,
But anyway, we don't have the theme of a day of judgment. We don't have the theme of Happy Birthday World. And we don't have the theme of the beginning of the year, any of that.
Is it all Midrashim?
It's all rabbinic tradition. However, as the great rabbis of the 19th century, Rav Hirsch, the Torah Tamima, Katav HaKabbalah, Mecklenburg, and Malbim, as they tried to do, they showed you how in very subtle ways the shorthand volume, the written Torah, always hints and reflects these laws like the one I just showed you. So when we get to a little further, we have to really analyze the Torah's expression. It's very nice to say a day of remembering going out of Egypt, Passover. A day of remembering you sat in Sukkot in the Midbar. That's a very clear concept. Very clear commemoration. But what the heck is a day of blowing? I mean, for a little 3-year-old, maybe go around blowing a horn is a day to commemorate or something.
The horn's supposed to awaken us.
And so that you must come to some kind of meaning in this blowing of horns or shofars.
Right.
So therefore, when the Torah says, this is how I'm working it out anyway. This class is strictly a speculation exercise and mental exercise. It's not authoritative. I'm not ruling on any laws. This is what we're doing here. So my speculative sense would lead me to say that if the Torah calls the day of blowing, then you have to see what blowing in fact signifies elsewhere in the Torah to know what the heck it's talking about. So, of course, we know it. We have the oral tradition, but when we're trying to reconstruct it, we show the link. So where is blowing of a shofar?
Torah isn't blowing. Torah
is a sound.
It's a certain type of blowing.
That's in its technical sense.
Yeah.
But when we call the Yom Trua, it means
Shvarim and
yeah,
Torah.
these
Torah
are
is fixing.
the types of
The
blowing.
blowing was in the camps.
In the camps, when?
When they were
When they went to fight.
When you're about to move, fight, when else?
Assemble.
Assemble. So you get that feeling of everyone coming together on Rosh HaShanah, of everybody on the move, maybe. That just occurred to me. People not being placid. Because what's the idea of a new year? The idea of a new year, or even in non-Jewish tradition, a New Year's resolution, is that you don't stay the same. You don't stay in the same place.
But blowing means tshuva, no?
Maybe. That's how we have to think about that. Offhand, not. Offhand, not. You have the concept of blowing trumpets, trumpets of Moses, to move the camp for war, to assemble the people. And what is, in our tradition, the greatest war? Who is a true warrior? Who can conquer his own impulse? Ezo Gibor, HaKovesh et Yitzro. And Tov Gibor Milikot Iyah. Greater is someone, a Gibor who conquers himself, than one who conquers the city. It's much easier to conquer others than oneself, as any good psychoanalyst will tell you. Yes.
Tell us where the quotations from, two of them.
Which one? I get
Last
all
one.
Greater
Greater is one who conquers himself.
Pirkei Avot, quoting the Bible. Yeah, it's the proof text. I don't remember exactly from where. In Pirkei Avot, you have a whole series of statements. We have a Bible expert here. He never had to get muddled down with Talmud, so he really knows the point.
It's a beautiful, meaningful book.
Makes sense.
So anyway, self-conquest is a theme. Assembling together, a big theme of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is all the people crown God together. Jews get together. A huge percentage of Israeli Jews, who otherwise may not have too much to do with this stuff, fill the synagogues on Rosh Hashanah, and especially Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur in Jerusalem is really a quiet day. Get on the move. A man should be on the move. And let me quote to you from the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet. In the morning you should sow your seed, and let your hand lie not fallow in the evening. For you know that which will succeed, the former or the latter, or both. The rabbis learned from that pasuk, if you learn much Torah in your youth, continue. You have a lot of children in your youth, continue. What happens to the woman in this, I don't know. And so forth. Till the very last moment a person breathes, they should be trying to do their utmost. This is a world of work. This is not a world of relaxation. You need a good worker knows he needs a certain amount of relaxation in order to work well. But he does it with the goal of working better. Relaxation time is the next word. As I always thought and said, and later I found the Talmudic sages said exactly the same words, there's plenty of time to sleep in the grave. No rush. Now, onward. So what other thing do we have associated with shofar and trumpet and all that? A very famous one, blatant one. The Ma'amad Har Sinai, the revelation of the Decalogue. God appears amidst shofars and trumpets and thunders and lightning and all.
Yeah, but and by whom? Not by the Jews.
No, but so those things accompany the revelation of God and His commandments to man, and they're attention getters. It's like when a king blows the trumpets, the king is coming. It's to sort of wake you up, put you on alert, and make you really give a certain respect and prominence to the message. So you see how I'm leading it into a day of judgment, really. It's a day when you appear before God. The king is coming. The king is coming. There's a famous Hasidic story that a rabbi has a low-class coachman, and they pass the king's orchards, and he sneaks in to grab some apples, and the rabbi yells, "The king sees you!" And the guy runs like mad and harnesses up the horses and goes and says, "Hey, I don't see anybody there." He says, "King sees you."
Why dafka the shofar?
Why dafka the shofar? Then we may get into the shofar as a ram's horn. And suddenly we may jump into another theme. The ram's horn first appears where? By the Akedah. God does not simply, that's our reading on the second day, chapter 22 of Genesis. God does not simply tell Abraham, oh, this was all a demonstration, you don't have to really sacrifice him. No, God seems to want an animal sacrifice instead. And He has a acher, another sheep, for a simple translation, caught by its horns in the brush, in the brambles. And Abraham sacrifices that sheep instead of Yitzchak. God will provide the sheep, He tells His son before. So I would say it's connected to a Akedah Yitzchak. And somehow it symbolizes the passive animal, the animal whose fate, his destiny is not in its own hands.
It's not the strength of the horn, how the animal defends himself.
That imagery is probably also correct. Where do we have that? By Joseph. Joseph is compared to a wild ra'im, whatever that animal is exactly. But karnei ra'im, karnav, bahem amim yinagach, he will strike nations with them. Rav Hirsch, if I remember, beautifully points out, not he will kill. It really means he will push them away. It's a peaceful animal. It doesn't really attack, but if you bother it, it'll give you a shove, get you out of the way. So he will push away nations with his horns, and so forth. So it's in praise of Joseph. So there is the imagery of pushing away that which is alien to one, that which would disturb one from one's destiny. The image of defending oneself. But you could see how judgment would come into this, at this point even. God appearing, God commanding, God the King, God who relates to man and tells man what to do. There's two levels of God. When someone says they're an atheist, in my opinion, a substitute word could be an idiot. And usually they don't mean it. What is it? When he says, I don't believe in God, what do you mean? You mean that the world is an accident? That there is no mastermind, there is no planner? With the advancement of science every year, that statement becomes increasingly ridiculous. Until we say, Ish ba'ar lo yedav, sil lo yavin, it says. A person who is an idiot who doesn't understand that God's the creator and the song of the Sabbath. There are other problems. What they really, I think, are bothered by is not, is there a God? That's obvious and common. But does that God care what you do and what happens to you? That's not common sense. And you can also interpret David's words in the Psalm for Shabbat. It occurred to me this week that a simple person cannot understand this, that the wicked are like grass which quickly grows and dies, and the righteous are like a palm tree which over a long period gives fruit. A person must be sophisticated, he must be deep to understand this. It's not easy to understand how God works in the world. It is easy to understand that there is a God in the world. So the way that human beings work, in my opinion, the true development of man is a series of steps. The first step is get the facts straight. Before you think, know the facts. The first and most overwhelming fact in all of reality is that there is a God. To say that the world is an accident is ludicrous. Now, once there is a God, the rest of man's life is then devoted to trying to figure out just, what is he? What does he want from me? What's this whole world about? Sweet mystery of love and life, can I find you? And the rest of man's life is to explore this question. How does he find out about God? How does he learn God's ways? When Moses wants to learn God's ways. Right? When does Moses ask to learn God's ways? Does anyone remember?
When he learns about the 13 attributes.
Where is that? Where is he?
He's in the cliff.
Yes. When is that?
He's up on the mountain.
Is he up on Sinai?
No, I think this is before, right?
No. Where he says, teach me your ways. Where is Moses? On Sinai?
No, when he sees the Egyptian and the Jew fighting?
No.
Wasn't it in Horeb?
Yeah, and where is it?
When he was a shepherd.
No.
No, when he went back up to,
Because after he came down and left God's presence to deal with the golden calf disco, after he deals with the Jews in their worst state, he suddenly, and it's a failure perhaps attributable to him, he suddenly has the chutzpah, the arrogance, to ask God, now teach me your ways. What do you mean now? I couldn't think of a worse moment to ask. The kid just smashed the cookie jar. He says, Daddy, buy me a new bicycle. And it's just not appropriate. So the message you get from that, I would say, is a peculiarly Jewish one. We are not the people of the book, or of the intellect, as the Mohammedans call us. Our essence is we are the people of holiness. Mamlechet Kohanim B'Goy Kadosh, Exodus 19:6. A kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And the way that we know God is through concern for others, both physically and spiritually. Moses leaves close communion with God to deal with the Jews in their orgy at the Golden Calf nightclub. And when he does that, he says, now God, show me your ways. The message seems to be that when the great religious leader, rather than standing in an ivory tower, comes down and mixes with the people at their lowest, when Rav Grossman and Migdal HaEmek enters a discotheque, at that moment he will get a knowledge of God's ways that he may not get staying in the kollel. Similarly, what is the religious background of the two great teachers of God to mankind, Moshe and David? What is their background? Which yeshiva did they go to? What would you say from reading the Bible? None. No. What religious act does Moses do before God appears to him?
He's a shepherd. He's looking up to.
That's a nice moral act. What specifically religious act does he do? What ritual? What God-related act? I would say nothing. You may have midrashim, but the simple text, and at some level we never deviate from the simple text. Simple text says nothing about Moses being a religious guy. He apparently is an assimilated Reformed Jew, or if they weren't really Jewish yet, but assimilated Avrahamian, who was in the court of Pharaoh, went to the best prep schools of the day, and nothing about Judaism. David, we see nothing about David being involved in Torah.
His prep school was his mother.
Doesn't he say?
We don't know how much his mother was able to influence. I don't know. Maybe to essential soul, but formal teaching. I mean, when he's weaned, he goes back to Miss Pharaoh, and he's not very old. Weaning is an interesting thing in general. That's a theme of Rosh
say the
HaShanah.
bear and the lion. He says God helped, David said God helped him to do it, so he must have had some
Awareness.
Well, awareness of God, perhaps, yes.
King David, doesn't he say, I want to spend my life in Torah?
Yes, he does. That's later, though. That's when he's writing Psalms. He's a King David already. I'm talking about before he's King David.
Before he's King
When
David.
he's a simple shepherd boy. We don't see any sign of religiosity. So I would say it works something like this. Man discovers God's existence through his observation and intellect, what we call science. You see God. The heavens proclaim the glory of God without a word. A Ziggy calendar right on God as he sees the sunrise. That much of God you see just by observation, unless you are so against the idea that you cloud your own observation. But the further steps of God, that God cares about people, cares what they do, cares what happens to them. I would say the way you do that is once you observe the basic fact of the universe, that there is a God, there is a plan, that things are not accidents. The next step is you observe another very unusual thing in the universe besides God. What's the other very unusual thing? Man. You observe that the human being is himself capable of relating to, understanding, and even manipulating the creation of God. We learn mathematical formulae and scientific principles by which we make TV sets and can see the stars millions of miles away and all sorts of interesting things. So man, as he gets into the realm of science, into the basic realm of the order of the universe, he then discovers the uniqueness of his own very self. And then it would behoove him, the rest of his life should be spent, if he's an open, curious person who wants truth, in pursuing these two great truths, that there is a God and that he's something like him. So then he will study all that is uniquely human. And when he studies what's uniquely human, he doesn't just get science and engineering, but he gets things like mercy and love and loyalty and dedication, uniquely human moral concepts. And studying those is not enough. He has to do them. So I would say man may discover God within himself before God appears to him externally, before there's a revelation of God. Moses is very nice to the sheep, according to our tradition. He carries in his hands a little lost sheep. David was probably a good, kind shepherd. Only after, in a very concealed, mundane way, they show great godlike, divine traits in their personality, does God actually appear to them and give them all kinds of secrets of the universal divinity. So I might suggest that it's perhaps better to find God to help build a settlement up north or something, or be a volunteer in the Israeli army, than to study mystical texts. Perhaps. It would fit Jewish pattern. Nowhere is there a mitzvah to study mysticism. But there is, I'm not saying it's not a worthwhile thing, but if a person never touches one word of mysticism, in my opinion, he's violated nothing in the Torah. The Torah has all kinds of things about being kind and helping people and praying to God and all sorts of things like that. But the study of ultimate realms of reality is not commanded anywhere. It's a nice thing to do, and it may inspire some people. I'm not knocking it, but it's really like an optional thing. And a very great danger, the Rambam's son points out, is when you take on optional things when you haven't done necessary things. There's certain basic duties and necessities in life. As a person, say, who's never read the Bible cover to cover, and suddenly they're wondering about the most intricate passages in the Zohar. It's like having a meal of ice cream only before you've had your meat and potatoes or whatever. No protein. So this is a danger, because the other is more fun. It's like fun to study the mystical stuff. It's fun to study philosophy, which I consider maybe even a more optional pastime. But philosophy, I don't know if it does so much for people really. And of course, you always have to ask each student of philosophy a very simple question, which I don't think you'll get a straight answer to. What's philosophy? Now, so the pattern as I see it is a person finds God in himself, and as he finds God in himself and his uniquely human morality, he then discovers the true reality of God in the universe. Now, there is a verse, believe it or not, in the Bible, which may even bring this all more to a focus. It's the verse we say before Shemona Esrei and in morning Kiddush on Rosh HaShanah. Does anyone recall what verse that is? Stanley, you're the man of all such knowledge. No, on Rosh Hashanah. We say Psalms 81, 4 and 5. You got it there? 81st Psalm, verses 4 and 5. Tiku, b'chodesh shofar, b'kesef leyom chagenu. Very strange verse. Blow with tekiah, the shofar, on chodesh, on the newness, b'kesef, in the hidden day, the day of our feast. What feast or festival do we have that's on Rosh Chodesh? Only Rosh Hashanah. So the verse is, I'd say, quite obviously referring to Rosh Hashanah. And it's called the hidden day because what is hidden or concealed in Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Hashanah is also Chodesh. It's a new month. Yet we don't even pray for the new month on the Shabbat before. Very strange tradition. It's a missing prayer, like the prayer for the soldiers in the state of Israel in Haredi and Hasidic synagogues and yeshivas. Terrible. So every Erev Rosh Hashanah, we do not bless the month of Tishrei. Some say it's included in Rosh Hashanah. All sevens are blessed, mystical notions like that. If it's the seventh month, it has its own blessing. But it's a problem. But it's called the hidden or concealed month. Why? Why should you do all this? Blow the shofar on that holiday, which is synonymous with newness, which occurs with Rosh Chodesh, and according to some traditions with the birthday of the world, to some traditions. Why? Ki chok Yisrael hu. Am I reading it okay? Because it's a portion or statute to Israel, and portion to Israel may suggest that this is a day of judgment, when God determines who gets what portion. Mishpat, justice. It's usually simply translated a law, but mishpat is justice. Le'elohei Yaakov, to God, to the Lord, to the God of justice of Jacob, when Jacob isn't quite Israel. So if you look at that verse sensitively, I would say that verse in Psalms indeed gives you the theme of Rosh Hashanah, spells out what is perhaps implicit in it being called a day of blowing shofar, of calling to attention, of proclaiming of the king is here, and so forth. Now, in Jewish tradition, Rosh Hashanah is not really a day of soul searching so much. It's something which precedes soul searching. And I'll make a brief review of the holidays. Reb Soloveitchik says in the course of the year, man falls down. He gradually sinks as plants die and animals hibernate. So man slips from his spiritual heights. And he reaches the absolute pits, the bottom of human degradation, each according to his own, in the period about the 3 weeks leading to Tisha B'Av, the destruction of the temple. Or at least that period is the collective experience of such a thing. So at that point, he's in such terrible shape, you can't just repent. But what you do is acknowledge your terrible shape. And you try to work your way out of it, the fast of Tisha B'Av. After that, you have a breather. That was quite an experience. And then comes the month of Elul. Ani l'dodi v'dodi li. You don't say the wrongs I've done to God. You remind yourself of a fact, of the intimate, unbreakable God-man relationship. God says, where's your bill of divorce? Through the prophet Micha, I believe. I've never divorced you. Maybe separated, but we're not divorced. So this is the time that you remember that you have a relationship, like a marriage. Ani l'dodi v'dodi li Elul. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is still to me. And the first stage in restoring the relationship is to really experience the grandeur of the relationship. If a husband and wife fight, he doesn't say, oh, come, let me take you out, because you haven't resolved things. And even if he's very nice or good to her or she to him, that's still not resolving the relationship. So the first step in a truly permanent and deep resolution of conflict and intimacy is that each party recognizes how awesome and great and meaningful and important the other is to them. So Rosh Hashanah, culminating Elul, is the theme of Malchus. God is our king. And that's all. Not so much I sin. There's a little of that snuck in later. But that's not the essence. The essence is God is concerned, Zichrono, that God is going to reveal himself again. Shofar in the Rosh Hashanah liturgy always accompanies the revelation of God, and that there will be a great future. V'hoya bayom hahu, we finish with, in the verses in Musaf. On that day, that great day, the day, Yitaka b'shofar gadol, there will be blown, it will be proclaimed, Yitaka, it's a passive, with a great shofar. And what will happen? Uvo ha'ovdim, the lost ones, the assimilated, the Eretz Ashur, and the lands of happiness and wealth. Ashrei Ashrei V'Secha. V'ani Dachim, and those pressed down. The Eretz Mitzrayim, and the lands of narrow straits, and the lands where you can't budge and move, Syria, Iraq. V'ishtachavu Hashem, and they will all bow down to God. V'har HaKodesh, and the holy mountain, Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. The great shofar will be blown one day. That's what we proclaim. And God is Melech. So there's his future, his revelation, his providence, all of this is Rosh Hashanah. Once we really reestablish our sense of the realities of the relationship, then we turn to our violations of the relationship. How could I have done that? Until I really recognize the relationship, I don't really feel how could I have done that. So the intermediate days of Tshuva, the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, are my gradual acknowledgement and painful realization of how I've betrayed this great relationship. And that culminates in Yom Kippur, where I really pour it forth. If I've done all this, then the relationship is back together and we make the party. We take God out to dinner, so to speak. We invite the patriarchs, who are now happy to be with us, into our sukkah. So Sukkot is the culmination of this whole process. And when the Jew is at one, okay with God, I'm okay, you're okay, at that point, he can invite everyone else to his party. And Sukkot, the Jews bring 70 bulls as sacrifices for the 70 bulls in the china shop, the wild cultures of humanity. But the effect begins to wear off almost as you do it. It's 13 the first day, then 12, then 11. It gradually tapers off. It's like preliminary tries to straighten out the world, to bring mankind back to Eden. And finally, only the Jew and God are left alone on Shemini Atzeret, on the 8th day of just stopping and pausing. If the wedding is over, the food is all gone, the musicians have packed up and gone home, there's no reason for anyone to stay, except those who really feel intimately close with the bride and groom linger a while. Stay a bit, just to sit quietly and groove in each other's company. So that's Shemini Atzeret. Right? Then comes the winter and the whole downhill process sort of starts again in the biblical festivals. So that's sort of an overview of the festivals. And after a dead winter when it looks like everything's gone, suddenly God makes everything pop up again. Spring is here. And the human soul, the Jewish soul, pops up again. Passover must be in that in the springtime. The calendar is intercalated so that that happens, just for that reason. And Sukkot must be in the fall, the time when things begin to taper off and die. There's a certain beauty in them there. Foliage, something I miss a little bit from New England. You gotta go up to the Golan, I guess. And anyway, and then so Passover is a rebirth, the culmination of the giving of the Torah. But then there's the downhill slide, because that's just a great revelation. It's not man to God, it's God to man, it's external. And as Professor Leibovitz, Yeshaya Leibovitz, so beautifully said, says God himself can appear to you and do every trick in the book, every miracle in Egypt and on the Red Sea, and the net result is a golden calf. And if you're really deeply involved in the Torah and learning and prayer and communion with God, you can be in the Middle Ages and God is hiding like no one ever hidden his life. And it looks like the Christians are right, that they've replaced you. The church triumphant is killing you and doing everything terrible. You have a choice of death or conversion, death or baptism. At that moment, the Jews kept perfect faith on the whole and massacred themselves and their families rather than become baptized. So Leibovitz said faith cannot be an external item, only an internal. And even the greatest display externally, after a while the effect will wear off. We who live near the wall and go to pray there every day aren't as excited as the tourist who comes from afar. Though he's not religious. He sees the wall, he's really in ecstasy. And let's face it, the date is always more fun than the marriage. It's a less serious business. But this would explain, it just occurred to me, I was always bothered by this image of Reb Soloveitchik. Why, after Shavuot, the giving of the Torah, everything goes downhill the Tisha B'Av fast? Because it's like the golden calf. That's just God coming to man. But the process from Tisha B'Av on back is Ani L'Dodi, I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me made. That the Jew first returns to God. We do tshuva. We open that whole eye of a needle, and then God makes it like the windows of the heavens themselves, that you enter heaven. Okay, so that's an overview of the holidays. On this holiday, Rosh Hashanah, there are two Torah readings. 2 and 8, something like that. On the first day we read Genesis 21, the birth of Isaac. On the second day we read Genesis 22, the sacrifice of Isaac. In both days, we read from Maftir, the short passage which we just read from Numbers 29 on the sacrifice for Rosh Hashanah. Question: why are Abraham and Isaac relevant to Rosh Hashanah? Abraham and Isaac are very nice, but why read about them? Might be more appropriate to read Genesis. This is the birthday of the world. Happy birthday, world. Let's pull out the baby pictures. Read Genesis.
Well, the birth of Isaac
Read
is
Noah. Huh?
maybe the birth of Isaac is the birth of the world.
But the Isaac is much later than the birth of the world.
No,
It's 11 generations later.
Incarnation of Isaac.
A reincarnation? That's only if you believe in reincarnation. Every chassid in Jerusalem will swear to you the reincarnation is true because they already said so. But if instead of going to them, you go to scholars, a scholar will tell you that that's one school of belief in Judaism. But Sajigon and Albo, etc., believed it was pagan nonsense. And the Abarbanel believed it was true, but that the Greeks discovered it. So you can't bring reincarnation as an explanation, because that only holds according to certain views. Avram is the first Jew.
Yeah.
Well, fine, what do Jews have to do with Rosh Hashanah? It's the birthday of the world. It's not the birth of the blues, I mean the Jews. It's the birth of the world. Okay?
It's the birthday of the nation.
Actually, the birth of the blues may not be such a wrong description, because creation doesn't turn out so happily. Creation results in unbridled passion, eating the non-kosher fruit, followed by unbridled aggression, the killing of Abel. We have a magnificent painting of that for sale now in our center. And then collectively, collective passion of the flood, and collective power and aggression of the tower generation. So perhaps indeed creation is the birth of the blues, and it's only rectified by recreation, the birth of the Jews, which is Abraham and Yitzchak. Well said, without the reincarnation business. The problem with the reincarnation, seriously, forgetting theoretical problems, in my opinion, the biggest problem with that, as with much of the mystical tradition, is there's not a word mentioning it in the Midrash or Talmud, which deals with all these issues of how the soul is formed and how the embryo is formed. So that leads me to think it's not real Jewish tradition, but it's ideas which may or may not be correct, as the Abarbanel says. He believes in reincarnation like mad. He says, thank God the Greeks discovered it. It's a form of
Wait,
science.
the Buddhists discovered it.
Well, you know more history than the Abarbanel. You see, when we deal with ancient rabbis, they have the Torah tradition very well. But they didn't have perhaps as much history and science as we have today. The Rambam's son, Reb Avraham, in the introduction to Yaakov, to the Agadah, says clearly that just as you are required to have faith in the rabbi's transmission of the tradition from Sinai, you are forbidden to respect persons in judgment, and it's forbidden to respect them in their opinions in secular matters.
Wait, say it again. You're forbidden to respect what?
Rabbinic opinion in secular matters. Your doctor isn't to tell you the law, and your rabbi is not to tell you medicine. This is the view of the Rambam, his son, of many. That God gave all mankind the intellectual and sensitive tools to discover the laws of science, and He gave the Jews the Torah to discover, let's call it, the laws of the soul. And the two are different. This is one view. Many of the Kabbalists will dispute this. They'll say it's all there. I'm more inclined to believe them when Meishar will show me how to make a kugel from the Torah or fix a washing machine. Meanwhile, the strongest ones who claim this view cannot do that. And they'll go to a cookbook and they'll go to a washing machine repair.
Medicine has discovered that all illnesses have a spiritual origin.
I don't know if medicine has discovered that.
Medicine has discovered that.
Where's medicine discovered such a thing? I haven't personally believed this, the psychosomatic theory of medicine. I happen to believe it, but I don't know if you could prove it. I don't know if a guy eats a toadstool and gets sick, if you could show that that's a spiritual disease. Because I know if he won't eat the toadstool, if he'll eat a proper mushroom, he won't get sick. It's not simple.
And if a guy stabs himself with a rusty
Yeah,
nail,
that's different, but that's not-
he won't get sick. If a guy stabs himself with a rusty nail,
I will say this.
spiritual health will not help him.
Yeah, the laws of nature are laws of God as much as laws of the Torah. But if a person reaches a really high level, and I'm not just talking about the Rosh Hashiva Hasidic Rebbe, I'm talking about someone like Daniel in the lion's den. If a person realizes a really high level, then perhaps God suspends for that person the laws of nature. Tzaddik goes there, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim, and so forth. But that is a little practical application to us because I don't know anybody like that anyway. Most people I know, if you throw them off a building, they're going to get hurt.
I heard on the radio this week, there's a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Nachman, and he just wrote a book, and this book is about the Kabbalah. And he says you can... Nachmani, yeah.
He's Moroccan. He gave a talk here, very aggressive.
Well, okay. And
Yeah.
then he says, first of all, you can only understand the Bible through Kabbalah. And then he comes and
The Rambam
says,
didn't understand the Bible?
then he said something. He said,
Well, he did,
how can we come in the commentaries of the Bible, come and critics our ancestors who must be perfect people, he said. How can we come? And it was a very interesting,
Yeah, well,
that's
obviously
what
the
it
people who give the criticism are convinced that they were perfect people. Actually, no, they're not perfect people. Even Moshe makes mistakes. Al tiftechu bin divim. Do not trust in princes. Prevent adam she'en lo teshua. And man who has no ultimate salvation. I say applies to everybody. We basically have only one God. It's God. Even Moses is not our God. We're not of Christian beliefs. And if Moses can have some things wrong with him, so can Reb Nachman, so can anyone else. So can Rav Shach. They're people.
He thinks that they must have been super.
I think that's Christian. It would be like a religion which says you only can reach God through a certain man, and you must go to his grave, and you must distrust intellect, and you must do a lot of meditation in the middle of the night. You must think all day about how not to think about sex. That doesn't strike me as Judaism. All right. Anyway.
But it might be.
It's not. All right. Now. So, we're back to Bereshis. So I would say it's like that. Universal mankind messes itself up. And creation is the birth of the blues, then the birth of the Jews is the beginning of creation getting back to itself, of man returning to Eden via Jerusalem. And there are even Midrashim which say that man was first sort of brought to Jerusalem and then to Eden, or vice versa, that there's a connection between Eden and Jerusalem, even though Eden is not Jerusalem. It's said that the whole world will come to itself and God through what we're doing here. Torah, So we start, but Avraham is not going to do it in his lifetime. And Avraham, according to the Kabbalah, and the Kabbalah should be very seriously considered in everything, I would say it should be considered as a Rishon. A Rishon means the people who lived about 1,000 years ago. Somehow we give them a higher status than the people who lived 400 years ago. I'm not so sure how correct this is. I mean, I could well argue with you that the Vilna Gaon may have been a brighter or more educated person than Rashi. I don't know. I simply don't know. They were all great people. But anyway, the convention in the yeshiva world, they have some kind of revelation from God, is the ones who lived about 1,000 years ago you call Rishon. So at least we know that the Zohar and other similar works are Rishonim. They appear around the year 1300 or so. Moses de Leon announces he's found this great book, which came to him through a wind or something. The Ramban found it in Israel, the whole story. His wife denies the story later. That's a separate thing.
The book itself is much older.
Well, maybe, yeah, maybe not. I don't know. I don't know. I wasn't there. The best opinion I know of, the best expert opinion, is that of Rabbi Yaakov Amdi. By the way, no really serious scholar of Kabbalah will say that the words of the Zohar were written thousands of years ago. None. They'll say that it's like the oral law, which was transmitted, and the words themselves were written by Moses de Leon or somebody around that time. Because the language is medieval, the references and so forth. The language is not antique. So it's clear that the actual writing is not ancient. Yaakov Emden, who is one of the smartest people, I think, who ever lived, but also someone perhaps emotionally disturbed, Yaakov Emden says in the early 1700s, after exhaustive studies of many books on the Zohar, and he was a Kabbalist, Yaakov Emden says it is an ancient Torah tradition, but which in the course of centuries got all kinds of things mixed up and added on, that it's not a reliably transmitted tradition. And Rav Avi Reb Hadari said the same thing by certain volumes of the Midrash Rabbah. I don't remember clearly which is which, but if I remember correctly, he says the Midrash Rabbah on Bereshis was very well edited and preserved and handed over, whereas that on Shemot is not. Things mixed up and so forth. Whereas in all the chaos of history, not everything got equal attention and care, and it's the Bible and Talmud, the two principal works which determine law, which got all the time and energy of the main scholars, not ancillary things like mystical traditions and midrashim and so forth. They had to save what was most important. Your house is burning down, you don't save your most beautiful painting before you save what you absolutely need to survive, and so forth. So anyway, Avraham in Kabbalah, which Reb Soloveitchik told me personally once on a walk back home on Shabbos, he said his opinion, the way we treat things like Hasidus and Kabbalah, is that these were people, great people, who had very deep thoughts, but they couched those thoughts in the parlance, in the Weltanschauung, in the worldview of their time. If they lived in a time that was all peopled by evil spirits and demons and all kinds of things like that, or spirit, whatever, so they would couch these great ideas within that worldview. But, he says, our task is to take the great ideas out of that worldview and translate them into our own worldview today, in a world of microbes and atoms and x-rays and video and so forth, as opposed to a world of demons and evil eyes and so forth. This is Reb Soloveitchik's view as personally communicated.
Excuse me, could it be
He's an expert, by the way, in Tanya. He does this with the Tanya. He taught Tanya to his pupils. But the Chabad people treat Tanya in a certain way. Rav Kook, who was himself a product of Chabad Tanya tradition, also used that book and the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, but he did not view it or come to the same conclusions as the Chabad people would come to from that book. Whereas Rav Kook comes out and says this is the beginning of the redemption. Israel Independence Day is a great and holy day. Lubavitcher Rebbe denies that this is the beginning of the Messianic era, that the state of Israel. He loves the state of Israel. He'll support its army and everything. But he doesn't see the religious dimension to it that Rav Kook and his followers see in it, using that same Kabbalistic Hasidic tradition. Reb Soloveitchik taught the Tanya to his pupils, and I gave you an idea of his approach to it, that to seek out great ideas and concepts and to translate them into contemporary frame of reference rather than medieval or post-medieval. Okay? Anyway, so in that tradition, a very beautiful and great idea is that Avraham represents Chesed. Now, they may phrase that as a mystical entity. Reb Soloveitchik takes this term Chesed and he uses it for a description of a certain part of human personality and activity, the outgoing gesture. That person or society which reaches out, which likes to experience and know as much and as many as possible, and to interact with them, is the person who's the salesman, the person who likes to talk to people, interact with them. But that's only one side of humanity. Therefore, Abraham cannot do the job of becoming a model man to bring everyone back to God, to recreate creation, to recreate Eden, because he's only one-sided, no matter how great he is. And he keeps one son, Yitzchak, to his values, and the son who is like him in personality, Yishmael, who's the outgoing relational, leaves Avram's values to use that personality to buy and sell and eat and drink and pinch women in the shuk or whatever the Ishmaelites do. Nice outgoing friendly people actually, but they use it in a rather low way, at least today. Their culture was very high in the Rambam's time. Yitzchak is the opposite. You don't see Yitzchak going around building altars. You don't see Yitzchak marrying several women, one wife. You don't see Yitzchak even taking a trip to New York. Not even the race funds. Yitzchak stays in the land of Israel. He's Olah Tamimah, the perfect sacrifice. So Yitzchak represents the opposite of Chesed, Gevurah. Gevurah, besides all its mystical, Kabbalistic connotations, Reb Soloveitchik said again, translating into our own terminology, it's the human, spiritual, psychological gesture of applying order and discipline and depth and inwardness. Not so much concerned with doing much and relating much, but doing things with precision and integrity and depth and sincerity. So it's like a counterfoil to Abraham's gesture. And that's also one-sided. So he gains a son, Yaakov. Though that, again, Yaakov is not like him. There you sense a dissonance. Yaakov doesn't relate to his father. He relates to his grandfather Abraham, as often happens. And he has another son, Esav, who is like him. A man of order, precision, and discipline, who forms the Vermont.
Esav isn't orderly. Esav is about as orderly as...
I hear what you're saying, Hindi. I thought about that. But that's like side moments. Esav is a warrior. Esav forms the Roman Empire, according to our tradition, which results eventually in Nazi Germany. Esav is the order, precision, and discipline and strength, but he doesn't use it for self-conquest, as we talked about before.
Esav is more like Attila the Hun. He can't think ahead for 5 minutes.
I don't agree with you. If it's Rome and Germany and so
Or
forth.
the Hell's Angels. Esav is a Hell's Angel.
No, he's not. No, it's not. That might be a moment, an offshoot of this. All right? Attila the Hun, or Hell's Angels, or other such people, may be. I've always bothered been bothered by that point. It occurs to me now, as you're asking it so forcefully in your inimitable style, that Attila the Hun and company are probably on moment. Not bad. So Esav represents the cool.
Attila the Hun just wanted to kill and loot. He didn't care if it was Jewish or Buddhist.
No, it doesn't have to be Jews, but in the
Chinese.
spirit of Amalek. So Esav is the opposite. Esav is the cool, cruel, ruthless conqueror who does have maybe binges of pleasure because he doesn't want depth of relationship in his necessary sexual and food and drink realms. So there may be an aspect of letting go, but it's a very controlled letting go. He gets drunk tonight with the knowledge he'll be up 7 o'clock tomorrow morning organizing his troops. It's a different kind of thing. Anyway, so Esav, the son who is like Yitzchak and who relates so well to him, again, he's got a good relationship with Daddy. He doesn't have to adopt Daddy's values. He goes off and does his own thing. And Yaakov then comes, and not immediately, but in a long, excruciating process, Yaakov blends the chesed of Abraham, his grandfather, with the Geburah of Yitzchak, his father, to create ideal man who's both in the depths and discipline of a truly godly man, with the outgoing quality of a person who's very much linked to this world of humanity. Yisrael, Kisarisa, because he became a prince in interaction with both God and man. So we now have ideal man in our recreation story, which starts on Rosh HaShanah. And then we go on to finish the book of creation, the book of Genesis, with the recreation of the ultimate development of natural man, a family. So the book of Genesis ends, they're already in Egypt for some time, with Yaakov's family finally getting in shape after almost self-destructing and killing each other. So that's gracious. Then we go on to Shemot, the non-natural or supernatural entity called nations, the sociological entity by which people live, which necessitates that the family of Israel, the family of Yaakov, turn into the people of Israel. And the rest of the Bible is their constitution, their rules, their trial runs, their failures, and going off to the depths of exploration of the Torah in themselves, Mishnah Torah, doing the Talmud, the Mishnah on the Torah of Deuteronomy. Okay? So that's our biblical overview for the day. So we start now with the birth of Yitzchak, because that means Avram is not just a brief spark in a dark night, a meteor, a comet, but Avram is the beginning of a long process, and there will always be a Yitzchak. This song, which we're going to read after Rosh Hashanah this year, Hazinu, this song shall never depart from their seed, is basically the message of Rosh Hashanah too, perhaps, that there's going to be a Yitzchak. Avram may be very old, beyond natural reproduction. The people of Israel may have had their day in history, but there will be a Yitzchak. And that Yitzchak will carry on Abraham, and he will have a Yaakov. And that Yaakov will become a Yisrael. He will have sons and sons until the Mashiach comes and brings everybody back. Remember, according to the Medrash Rabbah, Bereshis 98.9, if I remember, the Mashiach does not come to teach the Jews. Okay? Who wants Mashiach now? Who should really want them? Puerto Ricans, maybe, Cubans, all sorts of people, groups in New York. Because the Mashiach comes just to convince the Jews to make Aliyah. He's a Zionist emissary to the Jews of the diaspora, Once the Jews get back, all kinds of divine revelations occur, and God himself appears to them. Prophet Joel says, they'll all be your sons and your daughters. Women at the wall too. They'll all be prophets. You don't need to teach other people. And the Messiah will teach the Gentiles. Everybody goes up a notch. The Jews didn't want to learn from God, only from Moshe. This time they'll go direct to God. The other peoples didn't want the Torah at all, even from Moshe. They'll learn it from the Messiah. By a satellite probably, but however it's done. God makes video for all sorts of purposes. Besides the state of Israel politically being, I think clearly, as Rev Kook says, the beginning of our redemption, the beginning of the biblical messianic process, and Yom Ha'atzmaut is a religious holiday, just like Purim or Hanukkah or anything else, maybe more so. Similarly, video is the beginning of the redemption of the dead, of the resurrection of the dead. Video gives a great eternal life to all of us. Hopefully my great-great-grandchildren can watch this class. Your great-great-grandchildren can watch your responses. So it's a bit, all these means of communication are gradually making the person more eternal. Okay, so we'll just now actually go in for a few minutes to the Torah readings for Rosh HaShanah. The first reading is the birth of Isaac, chapter 21 in Genesis. It's Parshat Vayera, both readings. And the Lord remembered Sarah as he spoke. That in itself is very important. We start right off in our Torah reading with the Rosh Hashanah theme of Zichronot, that God remembers. Right? He knows when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, he knows whether you've been good or bad, so be good for goodness sake. So God remembers everything that a person does. When people talk about things like that, they really mean God, but they can't conceive of an abstract God, so they use all kinds of symbols for it. And God, when did God say that Sarah was going to have a baby? Anybody remember? Besides Stanley?
A year from now.
Huh?
A year from now.
I'm
No,
sorry?
he didn't. And to Abraham?
He didn't
Right,
say to
you
Abraham,
remember.
to Sarah, he said it to Abraham.
Good, everybody remembers this year. We finally did it after a couple of years. People who have not been to this class will usually answer, God announces it when the angels come to visit Abraham and Sarah. But people who have been to this class already know that the portion before that, the end of Lech Lecha, God already announces to Abraham that Sarah's going to give him a baby at this time.
Right.
He doesn't tell her, because God doesn't say Lamor. This is for a public release to say. God just tells Abraham, so he can't tell her. As Rabbi Gedalia Flair said, great Hasidic and Kabbalistic expert from the Old City. If anybody's interested in those realms, he gives a class at 8:25 or so, Monday nights at his home, 8 Shonei Halachot, after Rabbi Scheinberger's excellent class at 7:30 around the corner at Balei HaChama, number 5, top floor. All right, so God first had told Abraham, and then he sent angels to tell Sarah. And God did to Sarah as he spoke. And she got pregnant. No immaculate conceptions here. And Sarah gave birth to Abraham, old Abraham, 100 years old, a son for his old age. It doesn't just mean, of course we know Abraham was old. It means a son fit for his old age. A son who from the start, unlike Yishmael, would have the depth and sensitivity for an old, deep man to communicate with him. Not a son who would just play outside while Avram studied. And so we explain that Joseph was the Ben Zikonim, the son of old age to Yaakov. The one who in his old age he could commune with. Actually, the real son of his old age was Benjamin. Benjamin was out with the other guys making money with the sheep. It was Joseph who was the son of his old age. At the exact time that the Lord's proclaimed. And Avram called the name of his son, as he was told to do, who was born to him, whom Sarah gave birth to, Yitzchak, he shall rejoice or laugh. And he circumcised him, the first Jew to be circumcised on the 8th day, as God had commanded. And Avram was 100 years old when this happened. And Sarah said, this is a joke or a joy. Different ways you could translate this. The Lord made. Everyone who hears will either laugh at me or laugh with me. Take your pick. And she said, who will dream that for Abraham, Sarah would be nursing children, plural. All of that gives rise to the Medrash that all the princesses brought their children for her to nurse at this time. that I've had a son for his old age. Wow. Reb Soloveitchik said, Avram and Sarah here, read on Rosh HaShanah, are a metaphor for the Jewish people. The rabbis say there was a certain coin. On one side of the coin was a picture of old Avram and Sarah. And on the other side, the flip side of the coin was young Avram and Sarah. In the morning you shall sow your seed, and in the evening your hand shall not falter. Peoples come and go. The Greeks made their contribution to history and left the stage. The Assyrians made theirs, the Romans made theirs, the Crusaders made theirs and left the stage. Old Avram and Sarah don't leave the stage. The people of Israel, which is to other people seemingly something which is obsolete and gone and antique and made its contribution thousands of years ago to be developed by others, a relic from the past suddenly springs back to life in the state of Israel and turns the world on, maybe like it's never been turned on before. I would advise everybody to sell short their holdings of Vatican tourism. What seemed like an anachronism is the source of living waters. From Zion shall come forth Torah and the word of God from Jerusalem. The very Germans who tried to destroy the Jews, their children come to learn Torah and join the kibbutzim. We just had a wonderful German woman who converted and donated to our center to sell beautiful Jewish paper cuts which she made. I don't know if you saw them in the entrance. Lovely, lovely person. So what's happening? Old Avram and Sarah are giving birth, and all the princesses are bringing their children to suckle from Sarah. Got the message? You're beginning to see why this is chosen for Rosh Hashanah. And the child grew and was weaned. And Avram made a weenie roast, a great feast, on the day that Isaac was weaned. That's a new one. All right? Now, this verse intrigues me. Where is our contemporary weaning party? Here's a big biblical institution. Avram does it. So some commentators say, B'yom Gomel means the day, Milah, that he made circumcision.
Wait, say it again.
All right, the verse says that Abraham made, one second, Vayas Abraham Mishteh Gadol. Abraham made a great celebration. B'yom Higomel et Yitzchak. On the day that Yitzchak was weaned.
You don't wean an 8-day-old baby.
All right. So those commentators who are puzzled by my question want to say Higomel is like from Milah. It doesn't mean weaned here, but it means circumcised. The only problem is that gimel sticking itself in. All right. So it's difficult. The meaning of the text is the day it was weaned. So why don't we make a weaning party? Now, I explored this some years ago. You may have been in the class, Rosh, at the Israel Center. Remember when the German woman came and she brought us a sample that when a little German Jewish child, and maybe one of the most authentic Jewish traditions, not intermixed with Gentile ones, is the German Ashkenazi. The two oldest traditions are not the Hasidic and not the Litvisha and none of those things. The oldest traditions are the Yemenite and the Sephardim, probably. And among the Ashkenazim, the Jews of southern Germany, Bavaria, etc., who were there for like 1,000 years straight with a very clear, long tradition. And a woman from that tradition who came to my classes at the Israel Center, she brought this beautifully embroidered wrapper for the Torah, Wimpel it was called, I think, something like that, Wimpel. And she said when the child is 3 years old, at weaning time, they embroider his name and everything and give one of these to the shul and make a little party. I thought that the strange Kabbalistic and Hasidic custom called the upsharon, the holy haircut, may be a relic of this because, again, symbolically, they take it as some kind of mystical entity, but again, using Reb Soloveitchik's principle, that haircut may symbolize that it's time to trim your hair. And in my opinion, I forget where I saw it, Avram making the weaning party is because that's the time when he can begin to teach the kid. 2, 3 years old, there's different opinions. Rashi says 2, the Sefer Maccabeim says 3, they weaned. Because the Talmud says that a child can't learn until he's tasted wheat. Can't say from father and mother. It's an interesting concept. That wheat is the food of knowledge, the unique food that God made for man, which is why we make all the fusses over wheat-based food. There are 5 species of grain-based food. So it could be that this odd thing, and I view this very odd, this hair-cutting ceremony. I mean, it's a cute, full custom. Everybody enjoys it. They're happy. Any excuse for a party. But I'll be darned if I could see any real good reason for this. And the various superstitions, I think they're superstitions. If you cut the hair before 3, it has all kinds of bad consequences. I don't think you'll find any of this in Talmud Medrash. It's in Kabbalistic custom, Hasidic custom. So I would have a hunch that ceremony is a offshoot which has lost its original meaning of Abraham's 3-year-old weaning.
What does weaning actually mean?
Weaning is when they stop nursing it. In most simple cultures, natural cultures, a child is basically breastfed for several years. And then it's weaned and given food.
A year and a half.
Although Rashi says 2 years is the norm. It's interesting. Rashi, writing in 1040 plus, he wrote it after he was born. Rashi says 2 years, and the book of Maccabees someplace gives 3 years as a weaning day. All right? So I think I would say this is something to think about. Perhaps here's a grand way to revive an old institution, to make weaning parties. If you know anybody who's weaning a child for 2-3 years, and then on a definite day stops. A lot of people today sort of peter out. They don't stop. They wean them a little less, start feeding them something. Apparently, they may have...
Everybody.
Yeah. Apparently in those times, it just came a day you stop. And there are all kinds of laws and customs in the Talmud about once you stop it, the child shouldn't go back to the breast.
Wait.
It's a very interesting thing. Okay?
I just remembered in Romeo and Juliet, Juliet's nurse remembers that Juliet was weaned when she was 3 years old.
But the question is, was the one-day affair? Romeo and Juliet is a little after Rosh.
Of course.
Lahavdil Square.
No. Yaakov,
Halfway.
Yes.
I have an idea. Perhaps weaning means up to the mitzvah age, because it's the time you're dependent on your parents. It's the time you're dependent on your parents, like any mother's milk.
Yeah.
It's the time you go into the world. It's the time you go into the world. In other words, you're not fed. You have to become a man.
It's not a literal.
And it makes a lot of sense.
Well, I would say, by the way, that may be relevant to the second day's parsha, as long as you brought it up. Let's skip for a moment to the second day. The Akedah, how old was Yitzchak?
13.
37 is the rabbis. 13 is who? Who dared defy the Talmud and say he thinks they're wrong? Ibn Ezra. And what's the other Talmudic view besides 37? 5. So the Talmud gives 2 views. Always the one that you say, it's not that it's better in the Talmud, it happens to be the one that Rashi picked. Everybody learns only Rashi, so whatever Rashi says, people say. Why does a Nazir bring a sin offering? Plus, he never should have forbidden himself wine. Ramban says, because he stopped forbidding himself wine. Okay. So, there's a debate on the age of the Akedah of Yitzchak. 5 and 37 are the 2 views in the Talmud. The Ibn Ezra brings those views and says, I think they're wrong. Talmud closes around the year 400 or 500, the redaction of it. Ibn Ezra lives maybe 700 years later or so, 600-700 years. He says he thinks the Talmud's wrong. And he says like this, if he was 37, why praise Abraham? Praise Yitzchak. If he was 5, he could not carry enough wood for self-immolation. How much wood can a 5-year-old carry? It takes a lot of wood to burn up a 5-year-old. So it's like he was a teenager. Still under his father, but husky enough to carry the wood. Now, the same way the Ibn Ezra can argue on the Talmud, I can argue on the Ibn Ezra, I don't agree with him. I see little 5-year-old Arab kids, boy, they work, and Druze kids and Bedouin kids. He may be extrapolating from the kids in his time who were dainty little Talmudists or something. A, B, as this is where I bring in Advil's point, if you're 37 years old even, but you got a father like Avram, you may not be weaned yet. I'll go beyond your 13. You may not be weaned until 50 or 60, or until the father eventually dies, because you live in the shadow of this great, great man. It's a very difficult thing to be the son or daughter of a great person. Not just in terms of the expectations that are presumed for you, but just for your own self-expectations and your own image of it. And you feel so unindependent, so incapable of doing things for yourself. It's a difficulty. And I think you often find great tension between great people and their children, whether in religious or secular spheres.
But Yitzchak was great, and his father was great, and Yaakov was great. But what happened then to Moshe and his children?
It could be that greatness comes more after the fathers die, too. Anyway, what I wanted to bring here at this juncture was the Ibn Ezra's final comment. This is most relevant. It ties in with the Rambam's son of Avram I brought before, who says you must not respect rabbis in secular matters. The Ibn Ezra had something else, which I don't say everyone will agree with, but it's his view, and it's the Or HaChaim's view, who was the greatest Kabbalist. The Baal Shem Tov allegedly wanted to come to Israel to learn from the Or HaChaim. Or HaChaim is really deep. We don't have intellectual works from the Baal Shem Tov of the order of Or HaChaim, to the best of my knowledge. So he was like the great popularizer of Kabbalistic notions. So the Or HaChaim, yes, and the Ibn Ezra, and Hirsch, and Soloveitchik by implication, they say there's two other divisions in the Talmud. Even within the Torah realm, there's the realm of law and things handed down from Sinai. And there's the realm of things which the rabbis figure out by their common sense and logic. All right? So the Ibn Ezra says like this. When the rabbis say that Isaac was 5 or 37, if they tell me this is part of God's tradition from Sinai, no matter how silly it seems to me, I have to accept it. Because they're honest. I have faith in the sages, emunat chachamim. However, if it's their own thought, faith in the scholars doesn't mean that I have to agree with their reasoning. And he doesn't go into the trip, oh, they must be so much smarter because they lived hundreds of years before, 1,000 years before. He says, no. If they're based on logic, I think their logic is faulty. And that's really similar to the previous statement I brought by Avram ben Maimon, that you don't respect faces in judgment, only in tradition. Where they're the carriers of a tradition, fine. If it's guessing, not. And of course, where you see a million different views, it probably is guessing rather than clear tradition, because otherwise you wouldn't have so many views. So the Or HaChaim says this clearly. I think it's the beginning of Parshat Tzav. He gives an explanation. He says the Talmud explains the opposite of me. Maybe I can reconcile. He says, if not, so what? So what? All right? And implicitly, this is done all the time by the Ramban. He brings his own explanations. You may not like a Talmudic one. I taught you about Bat Yiftach, where I am convinced that her father never killed her. Yiftach never killed his daughter for God. He made her a nun. The explanation of all the Spanish authorities. Yet you'll find the Talmud says he killed her in one place. The Ramban insists he killed her. I find that far-fetched. So, in other words, the Jew comes out then, or the human being, with two very essential realms. There's one side of the human being that needs to sublimate himself, to subject himself to that beyond himself. That, like everything else in the universe, he has his laws, and there's people greater than him who know those laws better. So that's the legal, behavioristic side of the human being. In the realm of law, he basically has to subject himself to those who are authorities in the law, to God's Torah and its rabbinic authorities. But there's another side of the human being, a free, roaming, romping spirit and intellect. And that part, other than the very basic ideas of God's existence and unity and giving of the Torah and so forth, other than that, romp and play as much as you like. Because the realm of exploration and svara, of logic, God doesn't put those limits. And as Hirsch writes by the tzitzis, the knots symbolize the mitzvah. The tzitzis in general symbolize the mitzvah. But the law is the knots which come first are to be shorter than the free-flowing fringes. The idea, it's a tying yourself up, putting yourself in a structure and a framework from which you shouldn't become constipated, but on the contrary, you should have a more free-flowing spirit. Got it? So the tzitzis, the mitzvah, is to lead to freedom. We say, do not read engrave charut al luchot on the tablets, but cherut, freedom, on the tablets. It leads to an ultimate freedom. Discipline leads to freedom. All right? So that's enough for that. Onward for a few more minutes.
But don't they say the sages are closer to prophets? Sometimes.
Yeah, we see the sages are closer to Sinai. So maintaining the distinction I made, in those matters which are handed out from Sinai, you would regard them as superior. In those matters where we're progressing toward greater truth, perhaps science and medicine, in those matters we're closer to the Messianic age. And the Messianic age is when all the knowledge becomes revealed. The Zohar, for example, says in this millennium, all the gates of knowledge will open from the heaven, implying that the guys now know things that they didn't know before. So it's not simple. It is not simple. You might differentiate realms. And by the way,
how would you explain the Maharal? You know, I really can't understand.
Don't know if I would. Yes.
It's very hard to explain, with the bottle of blood and with the golem. How would you explain
But I
that?
don't explain my own.
Symbolism.
I prefer Hirsch. All right, now.
Yeah, you would assume by science. Science is the process of the world discovering God.
Yeah.
Because that's the divine plan. The divine plan is that we should all know God.
Yeah.
And through science, man comes to know God.
Yes, that's in
Man
fact,
comes to know that there's order in the world, that everything is
That's the famous
everything
Medrash.
relates.
Medrash Tanchuma Pekude, Gemara Nida 30b if I recall, it'll be on the sheet. In discussing the creation of man and how God sticks souls into bodies, not a word about reincarnation, I promise you. Look at the sources. Nothing. It speaks about the matter at length and doesn't mention reincarnation. It says God, through the angel, plucks a soul out of the collection of souls under his divine throne and tells it, soul, I got an adventure for you. I want to put you into sperm and egg, into a incipient fetus, down on earth. And there you're going to really become something. And the soul says, I don't want to go. And God is a good lawyer. God gives an argument, how it's better for you. You'll develop yourself instead of just being a passive soul upstairs. So I don't want to go. He doesn't convince the soul. God gives it a kick, or the angel gives it a kick, I forget. And the soul suddenly finds itself coming down into human sperm and egg. At that moment, there comes an angel. And the angel does what with the little soul? Teaches it what? Torah. Where do you get that? Because that's what they teach you in the yeshiva. It's not honest. Because that's only half of the Medrash. The angel does not give the kid a yeshiva education. The angel gives him a yeshiva university education. He teaches him the Torah and takes him on a tour of the whole universe. And shows him in the womb, like a lit tunnel, the whole universe before him lit up. And shows him heaven and hell. And shows him the place where he will die. And shows him the place where he will be buried. And then when he comes out, he loses all this, but he still has the preset. Let's say a Jewish fetus, human fetus. Every man, Jew or Gentile, has a preset for the Torah, and a preset for all experience. He's programmed. And it's just a question of activating that program, of putting that program onto the computer. So the angel then says it's time to leave. He says, all right, I got used to it already. I never wanted to be here, but once I'm here, I got used to it. No. You are formed by force. You are born by force. Bye. And out he goes into the world. At this point, Sigmund Freud steps in. With his observations, he discovered, indeed, the fetus always misses the state it was once in the womb. Our Medrash that I just explained to you says that in the womb he missed the state that was back there. Out into the world you go, and for better or for worse, most of us get to like this world and get used to it. Comes a certain day, angel says, time's up. Back to where you want to go. But by this time, like Moses never wanted to be the leader. But when it's time to die and go, he wasn't so eager to give it up to Joshua, according to many Midrash. Linger a while is what the soul would like. But no, I got an appointment. Give me an hour. Give me 5 minutes. Nope. Time to go, Moses. Take a look. That's it. All right. So what happens in the womb is a yeshiva university education. An angel teaches you Torah, and an angel teaches you science. And it occurred to me, the statement in the Talmud, you should not make anyone your teacher unless he's like an angel of the Lord of hosts. Because you've been used at some point in your dim unconscious to learning from an angel. So if your rabbi isn't like an angel, he's sort of a nasty person, always cussing out other people in God's host. Not like an angel of the Lord of hosts, the Belzer Rebbe said, who each angel gives respect to the others even though they have opposite functions. But if you got a fire and brimstone rabbi who's cussing out other rabbis and their works, he's not the right rabbi for you. Because he's not like the angel you originally learned from.
So the womb's world is much better than this world.
Oh yes, they say this is the world. The Medrash goes on, this world is wonderful. Freud will tell you that too. And people's unconscious associations and dreams. Would that I were again in the womb. I mean, I can't picture myself that way. I can't even stand being in the spot. That's enough of a womb. I like places with action and activity. But all right. Who knows? So the angel also shows him the whole world. So I would say the ideal Jewish education is Torah in derech eretz, not just Torah. And the teacher of science should also be an angel of God. As Admon said, the science should bring you to God. God saw the visual division in his university as much as the formal texts do. Okay? And that's what we say in Pirkei Avot. Very clear. Yafeh Talmud Torah im derech eretz. Torah is only beautiful when it's combined with worldliness, with all ways of the earth. You're to be a human being. And then if you go to the opposite extreme, not only aren't you in the world, but you don't do the most basic things like working or having a profession. B'chol Torah she'eini ma'malacha. And any Torah which doesn't have work, sofa batela, it will come to nothing. Vich goreret ovo. And the Torah itself will cause sin. And that's what we just had in the Haftorah that I wrote about, that we end we end the first passage, Hosea, I believe, with the words of God are straight, the righteous go in them, uposhim, kashluma, and sinners stumble in them. It's not that we're not talking about non-religious people. We're talking about people who are observant and religious and rotten. That they use the Torah itself as a means for rottenness. Any Torah which does not have work with it will cause sin. He'll go begging for his yeshiva or his shul and exaggerate its importance because he has to get that
I mean,
money.
yeshiva students to become rabbis? Isn't that the idea?
That is very questionable. That's the Rambam. It's forbidden to make
No,
money
but
from the Torah.
yeah, Jerusalem.
My
What
impression
is
is that the average yeshiva student ignores completely, or almost completely, the mitzvah of having a proper livelihood. They simply ignore it. When the time comes, they work something out. They go to a kollel.
The wife.
They learn to be a scribe. The wife works a little against Jewish law, which says the husband has to support the wife. If she wants to, all right, but the husband should be prepared to support his wife and so forth. Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rav Hirsch, the Rambam are very much against this whole idea of professional religion. It's not a Jewish concept. The Rambam is a doctor in Rosh Hashanah's vineyards, and the Abarbanel is the head of state. Almost all the great rabbis of yore, the Talmudic rabbis, were not on the take. Read, I don't want to go into that now, it's not our subject. You can read about it at length in the Rambam's Hilchos Talmud Torah, and especially in the Rambam's commentary to the Mishnah and Avot, to not make the Torah a spade to dig with, nor a crown to glorify yourself with. And that Rambam on the Mishnah has been translated into English reasonably well in the Chama Leibowitz's one of her articles on Parshat Zon Chaparacha in Sefer Devarim. That's where you can pick it up in English. Okay. Now, so Sarah saw the son of Hagar mocking Yitzhak and his mission, said you got to throw him out. It's not going to work. Yitzhak can't get his education with this guy around. Avram felt terribly. He loved Yishmael, perhaps more than Yitzhak, because that was his kindred soul. And God said, no, don't be worried. Listen to Sarah. You learn from here, what? That generally the man does not listen to his wife. Because God has to tell him here especially, listen to Sarah. He didn't want to otherwise. And that fits most of Jewish tradition. There are moments when the woman will have a deeper insight into people and reality than the man. The Talmud says extra intuition is given to women. But in most decisions which involve not that deeper insight, but sort of day-to-day reasoning and logic, the man is generally considered the leader. This is just playing with this idea.
I think women are much more logical than men.
No, men are not more.
Men are more.
Maybe men are more logical, women are deeper as a whole. Now remember,
Regesh.
don't forget the Talmud and Freud's bisexual theory of man. Nobody is pure male or pure female anymore. Only Adam and Eve were. We're all mixes. But the masculine leitmotif is conquest, abstraction, coldness, and logic. Important thing in the world. And the women's leitmotif is nurturing, empathy, closeness, oneness, linkage. You might say Avraham is the feminine gesture. I don't know how Kabbalah, you always get these flips of who's masculine and feminine. But I would say the way I describe Chesed and Gevurah is Reb Soloveitchik understands the Kabbalah. Avraham might represent more the feminine principle and Yitzchak the masculine. All right. Now, for an Isaac shall seed be called to you, your mission. But don't worry, the son of the bondswoman, the problem is the mother. And here you paradoxically see, in my opinion, on the one hand, God has to tell him to listen to Sarah. The normal expectation is he would not. And at the same time, God says, But the real essence, the real deepest depths, not mercantile logic, but the deepest depths of soul are in the woman. Because the son of the bondwoman, though Avram is his father, Avram Avinu, it's not going to make it. And vice versa. The worst Cossack can rape a Jewish woman, and that child is 100% holy kosher Jew. So we see, Reb Soloveitchik pointed out, that the mother gives the essence of soul, of spirit, of personality, and the father gives the subsequent formal training and education and development of it. And basically, Avram may not be so interested in Yitzchak until it's time for the weaning roast, until he's weaned and he can learn and study with him. But it's the mother who has the deep connection. Father's time to take over to teach the young boy how to fare in the world, how to fight ignorance, fight disease, fight poverty, fight enemies, go to Tzahal, the Israeli army. Those things father teaches you, not mother. Normally. But mother gives the soul essence. And the wife perpetuates that role, that her husband be known in the gates as her husband, when he's not a crass politician like the others. She's not a gadabout, Rev Hirsch says, unlike the Malbim's concept. The Eshet Chayil is basically home. But she's building a temple, a deep sanctuary of God at home, that makes such an impress on her husband and children that her husband is known as her husband when he goes among others in the gates. Got it? That's in the Hirsch Siddur on Eshet Chayil. Hirsch's explanation of Eshet Chayil is remarkable. Okay? Now, Abraham got up early, gave them bread and water, and he did give them enough apparently. But Hagar got lost and Yishmael got sick, the rabbis say. And it's reasonably clear that Hagar got lost. And I would say that may be a metaphor for the people of Yishmael running out of the water of Abraham when they got lost on his path. Like they still have things from Abraham, but they ran out of water of Torah. And Yishmael getting sick may be the realization suddenly, the stark realization that he's not the one who's really to carry on his father's tradition. Okay. And an angel comes to her, and these are great people, the Arabs. After all, God has made them a great nation. Together with the Jews, the Arab people have built the state of Israel. Probably built the building we're sitting in. They built my house. They built my center. They fix our cars. So many things. So we have a principle that only through righteous people do righteous things happen. They've got it wrong. I pray and hope in this coming year that both Jews and Arabs return to the Torah. And the Jews are at fault, in my opinion, for not living according to the Torah to inspire the Arabs, and for not making an active professional effort to teach the Arabs that Islam is false and the Torah is true. I hope maybe we'll do a little of it, but need someone with funds. Probably. All right? So she saw a well of water. Yishmael was saved. Hagar doesn't want to see him die. That may be a cruel kind of mercy. And his mother took my wife out of the land of Egypt. His problem was his mother and his wife. Wife replaces mother. In this case, again, wife was like mother. The Eshes Chayil, Rivka replaces Sarah. And the Egyptian lady replaces Sagar, the jet-set Egyptian lady. And she pulls down Yishmael. And it came to pass that Avimelech decides God's with Avram. He makes a deal with them. But Avram balls him out for the well which he took. Avimelech represents the high civilization with beautiful phrases, but where there's no real awe of God. And Avram says, you'll do anything. I don't accept your patent place facade. And he makes the covenant. Some rabbis criticized Avram. My gosh, that's incredible. How can rabbis criticize Avram? All right. Well, at least we should never criticize the Shulchan Aruch. Now, anyway, so Abraham makes this covenant. Some rabbis say that delayed the Jews' entry into Israel for generations. And he only makes it with his son and grandson. And the rabbis say a man doesn't care more than that. Once you have less than 25% interest, you really don't feel so much for your descendants. But Abraham does. And Yitzchak and Yaakov, they care for the descendants forever because they have a mission. If it's just my personality being projected, so after a couple generations, there's not much of me left. I've got such a minority shareholding, I might as well sell my shares. But if I'm concerned with a mission, then my 10th or 20th or 1000th generation descendant, he is my son. We are the children of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov because we are carriers on of their mission. So, that's that. First day Yantiv, second day Yantiv, we read chapter 22 about the sacrifice of Isaac. Due to the late hour, I won't read it all. I'll just make a comment or two about the sacrifice. Kierkegaard is quoted by Reb Soloveitchik that existentially, Avram does sacrifice Isaac. Every step he's walking and getting up early in the morning, he's sacrificing him. When God tells him in the end, Reb Soloveitchik says, is not don't sacrifice Isaac, but sacrifice him differently.
Sacrifice what?
Him differently. I always like to bring in this
He
context.
says don't damage him.
Huh?
He says don't damage him.
Yeah. Reb Moshe Cordovero, a great Kabbalist, had an interesting notion. Again, I'm putting the notions in modern terminology, not in Kabbalistic terminology, not in medieval terminology. His notion was that everything in the universe achieved its destiny by becoming part of that higher planet. The photosynthesis process, sunlight, minerals, and so forth, all are transformed into life, into a carrot. Then that earth and minerals and sun and water are higher. When that carrot or grass is eaten by a cow, it's still higher. It's into something where God is less concealed. It's into an animal. When that animal is eaten by the person, since man has free will, it can be higher or lower than the animal. If it's a holy person, that animal has an aliyah. That's why someone like the Bus of the Rebbe will only eat meat on Shabbos, when he feels he's okay to bring up the animal. Not to bring up, but to elevate the animal. Now,
So now we know why Jews have to eat cows.
yeah, the next step, this is the two reasons given why Noah could eat meat, because he was a tzaddik, and that's an elevation of the animal, because he saved their lives. So today, if we're really holy on Shabbos and we eat the chicken, we elevate the chicken, and we save its life. Because if nobody eats them, nobody grows them. Every time you eat a chicken, basically the computer enters an order to have another chicken live. Otherwise, there's no chicken life in the world. So we give them a certain limited life, and then we take them, as God does the people. So the next logical step I add on to Rav Moshe Cordovero is that man should then become part of God.
So why isn't a pig kosher? A pig just needs a little bit of elevation.
Oh, that's a different thing.
A pig
Why
is a lot smarter than some people.
Why some animals are not kosher is a separate subject.
Dolphins too.
That's a good question. Why some, but that's really not germane to what I'm doing now.
It's
That's partial Shemini.
We don't understand
Now.
God. But when the Mashiach comes,
Yeah, the pig may be kosher. It's on my Shemini sheet. I have a whole discussion. Chazir hu yachazor, he'll return to be kosher. Janelle's sister now working on the Rudiment pig. Anyway, just picture you'll have a Badat's pig for your Pesach Seder, maybe 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Under the Badat's. Why not? If it's kosher, it's kosher. Chew its cud, that's all you need. Where was I? Yes, so I add on to Cordovero then that the Akedah is natural, because man should merge into God. So what does God tell Avram? He says, no, but you're giving the trivial part, the body, not the soul. Remember, the soul is to develop in the body here on earth and conquer itself, so to speak. But if you just give me the body, then there's no time for the soul to develop. There's certain moments where the soul in one moment can develop in Kiddush Hashem, but basically, Avram, I want you to sacrifice all of yourself, but if you kill the body, then the soul is just back in heaven. There's no challenge to it. It's not going to become a sacrifice of bringing near to God of its own. So therefore, I'll give you an idea. Here's a sheep. Vicariously sacrifice the body, put your hands on the sheep and sacrifice it. The sheep represents the body caught in the thicket by its horns, by its power thrust perhaps, by its shouts. And the soul will continue to be sacrificed to me by day in, day out mitzvahs and learning and davening and so forth. You will sacrifice, you will bring close, korban mekarev, the soul to me. Reb Soloveitchik said, Avram does sacrifice Isaac every minute of his life. Little kid wants to go out and play ball like the other kids. You have to go through the torture of learning with them, and he doesn't feel so right about it. And we do sacrifice our sons to God. The very fact that they're being Jewish and endangering their lives is a sacrifice. So that's the message. And then one other aspect of it, he doesn't go alone with Yitzchak. He takes along two lads with him. Who are the two lads? Traditionally, it's the only two people mentioned before, Yishmael and Eliezer. All right? Eliezer, Reb Soloveitchik said, represents the follower of Abraham, the Jew, but somehow can't quite make it as his successor. The not sufficiently turned on Jew. Perhaps the non-observant Jew. And the other one, Ishmael, represents perhaps the finest of the non-Jews, the monotheist, Avram's son, and so forth. So Reb Soloveitch says like this, you want them, take them. All of a sudden in the middle he says, you wait here, you wait here with the donkey. I and the lad, referring to Yitzchak, shall go to Ko, over there, to that mysterious place. Like Ko Omar Hashem, it's a word of mystery. Ko, says God. It means numerically it's 25, the same as Hanukkah, which is the retransformation of the lowest physicality to holiness, the defiled temple to a holy temple. Anyway, so he says, if you don't want them, don't take them. Why take them and then tell them you can't come with us and so on. So it says like this. The message is that the Jew, Avram, on his way to Har Moriah, to the Messianic age, can't do it alone. The same way as he's supposed to save the whole world. It's not some kind of game God plays with the Jews. They're exemplars, they're kingdom of priests and the holy nation. So that Jew must work with others on the way. He may need the United States to make a state of Israel on his way to Har Moriah. He needs the non-religious Jew. Religious Jews alone never would have pulled off the state of Israel. So he has to go with them, and at the same time recognize he dances also to a different drummer. And at certain moments of ultimate faith confrontations, he must tell them, you remain here with the donkey, the chamor, which is a symbol of chomer, of this world of materialism. And I and the lad will go to Ko, the symbol, the word Ko, of the transcendental realm. But we will return to you. Someday we'll all be together. There will be a day on which God will be one, his name one. And you won't have this tension. And he said, and Reb Soloveitch said this is the difficult role of the religious Zionist. It's easy to be a secularist, and it's easy to be an isolationist Haredi. It's a clear path where people like any other people, with some customs of Jews, or we're different from everyone else and we stay away from them as much as possible. The difficult role is that of Abraham. He says to the Bnei Ches, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. I am a stranger and a settler with you. At the same time, I'm one of you and yet not one of you. It's a very difficult role. And Yaakov says, even Lavan, after 20 years, it's his father-in-law. He's built quite a life there. Garti, I was still a stranger. Garti is Taryag. Reb Soloveitch says it's not just a cute play on numbers. It means the mitzvahs separate the Jew, that he's always an existential stranger wherever he is outside of his people in Israel. So, Im Lavan, I'm with Lavan, I'm a good citizen, very much in this world. Yaakov's with sheep and cows and servants and the whole bit. Like all the Ovot, they're not Kolel people. But Garti, I was a stranger. Ki Taryag mitzvot, Shemar. Okay? So that's the Akedah lessons. And Avram comes back from the Akedah, he returns to the lads, and suddenly he hears news that a whole bunch of children are born. To whom? Anyone remember?
His brother.
Came to pass after these things was told Avram, behold, Milcah, she also bore children to your brother Nahor, Uz and Buz and Kemuel and Chesed, a whole bunch of names. Reb Soloveitch said, while the Jew's going through his great sacrificial life, he's bringing his children close to God, the sacrifice of Yitzchak. For the rest of the world, the Jews are the firstborn, the ones who make the passage through the womb easier for others to emerge therefrom, Rav Hirsch says. While he's going through that whole process, the world hardly pays notice and doesn't give a damn. All they're interested in is Avram's brother, the great prince back there, suddenly had a son. There's another jet-set prince, another prize fighter. I'll never forget one time as I was landing in Boston, the airline hostess announces, welcome to Boston, home of the Bruins and the Red Sox. What a vulgarity. The Boston Rebbe lives in Boston, Reb Soloveitch, Children's Hospital, MIT, Harvard. Welcome to the home of the Bruins and the Red Sox. Avram's just completed the Akedah. Nahor had a whole bunch of kids. That's the headline the next day. So that finishes our study of the Rosh Hashanah portions. Now I'll just give maybe 1 minute to the Haftorahs of Rosh Hashanah. First question, what are the Haftorahs of Rosh Hashanah? Let's find them. Shabbos Nuru. I hope they're here. Better use a Parsha sheet. Haftorahs. First day deals with Chana's prayers for a child, who will eventually be Shmuel. And this again is the motif of Rosh Hashanah, is a day of prayer, of getting to know God, of God absorption. Not so much of confessing sins, but prayer. And our model for prayer again, prayer is not so much a matter of cold logic. It's a matter of warm depth. So prayer is not learned from men. Men have formal prayer. minions and kaddishes and shuls and stuff like that. In my opinion, formal prayer may impinge on a woman's depth and subjective prayer. So true laws of prayer are learned from Hannah, from this Haftarah. So Hannah prays, and the son she gets, Shemuel, it's very similar to the case of Avram and Sarah. The son she gets is really far higher than her co-wife sons, just like Hagar's son Ishmael. And there's a certain tension between the two women. Some of the rabbis try to ascribe high motives to Penina, that she goes and teases Hannah to make her pray more so she should get a child. Very interesting idea. If you don't believe it, you'll still go to heaven, but it's interesting. Okay, stop crying, Rachel. For children will return to their borders. Is Ephraim a fine son to me? Ben Yakir li Ephraim is really often deepest. Last word right after the final exile, a truly happy man.